Welcome back to the Louisiana Grazing Lands Conservation Initiative's two-part series on rotational grazing economics. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, be sure to check it out. In that session, we covered the foundational economic principles of rotational grazing, including cost considerations and financial benefits. In part 2, we will expand on our previous discussion by examining a real-world case study focused on the economics of grazing. We will take a closer look at a partial budget from Louisiana to assess the financial impact of rotational grazing. Here's part 2.
Yeah, and again, I come back to how interesting would this be to have in the Deep South with with a non-fescue forage system. Man, this would be really amazing to see in our Louisiana pastures in the Deep South. And I think we would, um, our stocking rates are just so much tremendously higher than this. So it looks to me like it would shorten these. I don't know, but I don't want to hold us up on this slide too much longer. It's a complicated one. It's a really interesting one.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I'd be very curious to see it too. I think that the investment costs we would see, you would lose out at lower stocking rates. I do believe that just because continues you're not putting anything extra in. But man, if you had the time to rotate and increase your stocking ratio and you were serious about it and you had the capability and willingness and maybe even you got into a program, I don't know, like Equip, that payback period is going to be a lot shorter. So we'll move on. I actually have a good bit left, but I want to cover everything and as deep as we want. So here's the revenue side of that study that we just talked about, that complex net present value study. This is the ending.
What are our left and bottom that we're looking at?
Yes. So we're looking at weight on the y-axis on the vertical, and on the horizontal we're looking at the same stocking rate. So what I found very interesting in this one is the top line that you see, the orange, that's your rotational grazing. So the bottom is your continuous. So what's interesting to me is, you remember on the past slide, 0.06, rotational grazing was not as profitable. But if you were out there and look at the stockers, their ending weight was a lot higher. So really what that's telling me is you just didn't have enough time to pay off the infrastructure to get into rotational grazing. Because at all levels and all stocking rates here, rotational grazing, that top line, they had a higher ending weight than that of continuous grazing. So your revenue side of your business is looking a lot better. Looks a lot better.
And on a long-term landowner, if a landowner is really interested in thinking about their land profitability long-term or their farm profitability, man, what a great investment to do up front, and go ahead and get that curve to your favor, and then come in and be able to do a lot more with your property and your farm in the very earlier stages, have your expenses and then be done with it.
Absolutely. And I think that this kind of shares the same, it's interesting point of inflections as the economic net present value. So, I mean, this is in very simple terms that I think we saw evident on that last slide. But for continuous grazing, you see a very sharp, right around 0.08, you see this sharp decline. And then at 0.12, another one. And it gets so low and so bad that at this, it starts to taper off. Like the slope here is it's for sure less than right here. And what that tells me is their ending weight, whenever you're increasing in stocking rate right here, they've reached the lowest of lows. Like they can't get much lower than that. They're maybe at 620, 630, but they can't get much lower. And that's what that's telling me right there is if you're not losing on a steep curve like this, your ending weight is at rock bottom. It can't go down much further. And I really like seeing that, with rotational grazing, of course, you're going to have a reduction in ending weight, but it happens less steep, it's less severe, and then you never get to that point where the slope here just kicks out, which tells me, okay, like the system's done. It's getting ugly. It's tapped out. They've reached rock bottom and we're just coasting. And that's what I really like at the ending weight graph. I think that's very telling to the profitability side of what we see. Very cool though to see that the revenue is always positive. You might not make it because of the cost, but the revenue side always looks good. All right, moving on. Partial budgeting. This is very important. I won't spend a lot of time. Hopefully I can like say it once, and Tara, you'll be able to hopefully help say it in a better way. But this focuses on the costs and benefits associated with a specific change in management rather than considering an entire budget. Okay. This also doesn't take into factor the profitability. Everybody likes to use the word, is this profitable? Is this profitable? What I'm about to show you in this case study uses this partial budget analysis. And what that is going to do, it's not saying whether or not this whole operation is profitable or not. It's showing you the change in profit once you decide to have a change in management. So it's only going to be the cost associated moving from continuous grazing into rotational grazing. Or even if you were to increase your herd size, it's going to go, you're not going to start from 0 and go to 100. If you added 50, it's going to look like, okay, what are the costs associated for those 50? You're not going to do 100. So it's a very different it's a very different animal than an entire budget and breaking it down. So of course, with partial budgeting, because we're looking at the change in management, we're going to have to make some assumptions of prices here. This is oftentimes partial budget. I view it as a what if thing. I run these, what I call sensitivity analysis, like a low, a medium, a high, meaning like, okay, this is worst case scenario. Medium is like, I think this is what is realistic right now, what would happen. And then high of like, I hit the jackpot. So I always try to run those 3 different kinds of approaches to help inform my decision making. And this will tell us whether or not, hey, this is a worthwhile investment, and we should now do a whole budget to see what it would look like on our place and what we need. But this is a what if scenario and putting numbers behind it and trying to solve that. Tara, does that make sense? Did I do okay? What do you think?
Yeah. I'm just sitting here thinking I would it would be very difficult to live with you at times if you're running low, medium, and high like on every purchase when you go to the grocery store. That could take a while.
I did with the truck that I got. Yeah, I did that with the rototiller. Did that. I've done that with everything. Worst, best, yeah, medium. Okay.
Getting married, having a baby.
Getting married, having a baby. Yeah. Where does
Does
that
it make sense?
Does it make sense enough? Am I scared? Yes. Am I scared? Is it worthwhile? Does God call me into things that strike low fear in me? Yes. We have to grow. So anyway, that's what partial budgeting is. And we'll move on. If y'all have questions during this, don't be afraid to ask, because this is where it comes into play. Partial budget. Okay. The goal here, we always start with a goal. With partial budgeting, we say, what is it that I'm wanting to do? What is it that I want to purchase? Or maybe it's just a change. So for this, the goal was to increase stocking rate from 60 to 100 cows and add interior fencing. I should have put interior fencing. So what we're going to try to do here is realistically show what happens over time. And I think this is a very smart way to do it. Don't jump into a deep lake if you can't swim. Go around the banks and get your feet wet. Go up to your knees and tread a little bit, see if you feel comfortable. This is a very good way to see if this management is for you and if it's effective or not. So we're going to grow. This is going out. I actually did it out to 10 years, but to get where we're going, we did year 1 on this operation, added 10 bred cows and high tensile fence for interior fencing. And you can see year 1 right here, they divided the field in 2. Okay, so year 1, this is the interior cross fence right here. Year 2, add 15 bred cows and add high tensile fence. So year 2 was here, which put it into quarters. Year 3, added 15 more bred cows and added electric poly fence. So year 3, now it divided it up into 8. And year 4, now you've paid for everything, installed everything, you're at a new stocking rate. And now you're incurring the ownership cost, and there's going to be some replacement costs still that have to be had, but you will be now operating at a higher level and have opportunity for I wouldn't say higher profit margin, but total profit would be higher. And that's what we're going to see. So, Tara, does that make sense? Did I say that right? Or
100%. And James, I'm going to put on my Stuart Gardner hat.
please?
Stuart Gardner is one of our best grazing assistance people in our state. And Stuart always will say, this very much depends on your operation. This is a chart of showcasing something that would really never happen in real life. Like it's highly unrealistic that your farm is laid out like this. It would probably
Yeah.
actually include a lane, because as you can see, the farthest to the right and left paddocks don't include a water source right now. So it would actually have to include a lane. And then
Mhm.
you could also have some pond degradation on that if pond is your only water source. But this was just as James said, it's a partial, it's a what if. And it's a, you can't, please don't ever take this as a formula. It's just a starting point and a thought process.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I mean, from anything to the slope of your land, erosion to plugging in certain places, there's so many other technical factors that play into this that, grazing specialists and Louisiana Grazing Lands would be happy to come and help. And that's why I really do love um, about this whole agricultural industry is we all have to work together. So, my expertise, what I'm trying to do is numbers, and I try to learn from technical experts all the time about things that I don't know about. So before this, Tara was kind enough to bring me along, but I've been a row crop enterprise budget. I know rice, corn, cotton, sugarcane, beans, but we all make each other better and put ourselves in more realistic scenarios, and we trust each other to where y'all can be technical experts, just like our friend Stuart Gardner here at NRCS. Our new grazing specialist up here at the state office is Sean Taylor. So never be afraid to reach out to him. We have area specialists that are willing to help, such as Cody Moe, and of course your field offices. So there's a great network of people. I'm privileged just to be one of those that serve without glasses, but a nerd nonetheless, of doing the numbers. So anyway, yeah, totally agree. Totally agree with all that. So let's get into this. How do we do this with partial budget? Well, the first year we know we're adding 10 bred cows and a high tensile fence. Okay. So we need to understand the cost and the benefits associated with that. I forgot. So for assumptions, y'all can pick me to pieces and it's fine. But eventually at the end of the day, anyone would need to make assumptions to be able to come up with some type of dollar value at the end. Just like with manure, it doesn't make me happy to be able to throw a dollar value behind it because I want them to be accurate. But in this case, we had to assume a price per pound for your steers and heifers. Same for the bred cows that are purchased. I used depreciation values from Dr. Kirk Guidry at LSU. Does a very good job. He just updated those for 2025. I saw them released. Used an 85% calving rate, assumed a $600 a head variable cost, which, that's going to vary per person. It totally depends there. That is a huge one. That's a huge question mark in my mind. For a lot of reasons. One is this variable cost per head is assumed you're feeding X amount of hay in the winter. And if you're utilizing your forage, maybe you're doing less of that. But maybe there was vaccines and medical vet bills that came up and each head actually was a little bit more than that. So it's totally unique to your operation, but it's a good benchmark baseline. And that's what we're using this for as a proxy. The vaccines for steers and heifers, and then I utilize the cost of fencing that I showed previously. So yeah, for those are our assumptions that we're gonna run with. Yes, I know they're not the most accurate to date. I'm not online looking right now at new prices. It would be impossible, but this will still prove the science at the end of the day. That's what's cool is no matter what these prices are, your payback period might be different, your return on investment might be a little higher or lower, but eventually, just like we saw the trajectory on those last graphs, the science will come out to be true at the end, and that's what's important. All right. So for year one, well, what did we do? We added bred cow. So the way that I view this, excuse me for a second, my phone, my laptop's about to die. I actually have to charge it. I'll redo that. Sorry, Tara.
No problem. Take a little break.
Yeah.
This is great, James.
Good. I'm
Really
trying.
good.
I know that we're going over time, but I was like, I don't know, like
We can
we can
definitely,
edit.
what we may do is just split this into two-part as
That's
well.
great. That's great because I feel like one part we just talked about values, and now we're doing the case study. So
Yeah,
maybe
and
we
we'll
could.
also definitely be able to get a lot of reels and small videos out of this. This is super.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm glad. Um, I did get my final. I just found out my final date last night at 8 p.m. So I'm glad we're doing this because my first day is going to be January 27th. So I
Mhm.
like I have no time left.
Yeah,
All right.
and just so you're for your information, yesterday I was looking at the prices average, and they've raised on the steers and heifers, and
Hmm.
replaced bred cows may be up to closer to 15 to 1800 depending on the
Yeah.
cows. Now, if you're willing
Er,
to shop and wait for the right one, you might could find some, and look for the right week.
Yeah.
It be there at the right time. I would think an order buyer could find you some bred cows for 12.50, but I know you're going to dig into that.
Oh yeah. I mean, not really the
Not
prices.
really.
What the price? Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I will. And
I mean, you don't have to go into that. I still think these numbers are very comparable.
I did too, because I mean, when I saw Dr. Kurt Guidry give his cattle market outlook at the Expo outlook, when was that?
Hmm.
Tuesday.
Hmm.
He said all year long prices should remain for steers between 280 and 295. He
Yeah.
firmly believed that, and he said that next year will be just as strong.
Yeah.
There's a lack of supply right now from the drought that was impacted, and we're importing less uh, beef. And so what's happening is domestic prices are being supported and raised because of that. So it looks like a really strong. I mean, we haven't had these kind of prices in a while, remain this high for this long. And
Well, and it's a great time to take that extra money that you're making and put that into your infrastructure
yes,
improvements
yes,
while you have it. And that way you're putting that return into your in reinvesting into your land, especially
absolutely.
for land and not a lease property.
Yeah,
And you're able to maybe even increase your mama cow herd size and really learn your management better because, in the next 2 to 3 years, while these prices are extremely high, it's the more mama cows you can have, the quicker, the better. The more
yep,
cows you can have hit the ground each year, it's
yep,
going to be a direct result on your bottom line. As long as, again, you can keep their weight at a managed level and get them rebred, and that all comes
yep,
down to forage production too. There's so much that depends on there, but
yep,
that forage production and taking a good care of that and utilizing your resources well is super important.
100% Tara. Yeah, I agree. I really ended up really, I didn't know how much I would like the study or doing it, but I really did. I know I could do more, and that's one thing is like I had so many other irons in the fire, so to speak, and getting payment schedules out and dealing with rice producers and other fires. But I really did enjoy this, and I hope you all know that. I mean, I took it as an honor that just as a civil servant that I get to even do
Mhm.
this. And so this was a blast for me. I really do hope that in the future that this will start conversations. Not that it's I don't ever look for my stuff to change the world, but like to add values to something that's never been valued before. I take a lot of like good, not bad pride, but like good pride in like starting the conversation. You know, um,
Good.
that's all I want.
Wonderful. Well, let's dig
Cool,
in.
cool. Let's do it. All right. So year one, this is how I ran the partial budget on my Excel spreadsheet. And I had a lot of these, so I'll try to condense down what we do here. So for a partial budget, we have our benefits and we have our cost. Our benefits look like, okay, what's our added returns? And then what's our reduced cost? And then on our cost category, what did we have to do in this management? Well, we had added bred cows, we had some vaccines, we had labor, and we had fencing. So you can see why this is a hefty investment, especially in those beginning years moving to rotational grazing. So
Yeah,
if we move,
to
yeah,
interject one thing here, and if you'll notice, there's only vaccines as far as the cost associated with your calves on the ground. Um, it looks to me, James, like this is an assumption that you're selling at weaning, the day or two after you weaning, that you're not actually weaning the cattle yourself and having some feed costs in your calves there.
yeah, I think that was probably the assumption because I do have variable costs per head for the bred cows that were added, but I don't have anything for the steers and heifers because I didn't know how long they would be held or if they're sold at weaning. So yeah, and like I said, what's fun about partial budget is the spreadsheet exists. Once you set it up, you can change that value. You know, if it from pounds to prices to a different calving rate to you want to raise your variable cost to be conservative for those steers and heifers, but not outside of just vaccines, then absolutely. Um, is that a fair assessment? I don't know.
Absolutely. And if you add in a feed cost, it's almost worth looking at economically as a producer. It's worth looking at if I feed them for 6 weeks after weaning, how much more per pound, how much more pounds am I getting, or how much more per pound am I getting? And season has to do a lot with that type of grain, type of feeding system. So that is truly a whole different partial budget to dig
Yeah,
in.
yeah,
So that's not what we're looking at here. We're looking at an assumption that the calves are sold at market value. I mean, at weaning, like a day or two after they're taken from their mamas, from what I can
right.
see.
Yeah. Okay. That sounds great. And I would love to run a partial budget later on that because that sounds really fun. Uh, but so I usually start in the cost category for me because we know that rotational grazing has a lot of investment costs. So we're going to think about the cost and then the benefits that are had from it. So if we added the 10 bred cows here and their price, it's multiplied out here and then broken down on a per acre basis, which is really weird. A lot of people do animal units. I decided to go per acre. I do have a justified reason for that. I I tend to do budgets on a per acre basis because with animal units, you're looking at the expenses that are tied up in relation to your herd, whether it's the health, the feed, everything is tied up into them. For me, because we're trying to look at forage utilization, I care about every single blade of grass. So I break it down usually on a per acre basis because I care about pasture management. I care about what's happening to the blades of grass and I am caring still about the health of the herd. I can add in vaccines still and break it down on a per acre basis. And it might be a shortfall of mine, but that's what I do for row crops. And for this, it just made sense for me because we're focusing on the grass, not necessarily um, the herd. We're doing both at once, but we're really curious to see how the change in forage utilization, rotation, grazing impacts profitability. So I'll focus on it per acre. Um, so again, what did we add? We added the bred cows. We had a variable cost per head for those bred cows. Also added the depreciation because as soon as they, just like the fence, as soon as it's standing, it actually costs you something per year to have it. And so we counted the depreciation in for that bred cow that's on your operation. The vaccines for the steers and heifers, um, and then a labor cost. That'll be for running your fence, um, and for rotating the cows, and then your high tensile. I gave what it costs to install it here, and then the ownership cost, which is depreciation and repair for the first year. So all of that is factored in. And the only returns that you're experiencing is your calf crop at the calving rate of 85%. So all you're doing is gaining $57 an acre. And we invested $123. And remember, I don't say lose. I say we invested because we're going to see what happens. $123. So if we broke this out on a per acre basis, $66.35 an acre that you lost. If you're talking about this was a 200-acre operation, this is $13,000. And so that's a lot of money. And what I would say to that is going into a new management and a rotational grazing, you have to prepare for this moment. You have to know that these are investments that, like anything, they cost you something up front. They're sacrificing money that you could be having right now for the gains in the future. And so I think anybody understands that. But selecting conservation and rotational grazing not only has to do with do you want the gains later, but it has to do with do I have the capability or the willingness to bear the risk right now? If margins are really tight, you might say no. Maybe you have a good emergency savings and you have all that in place and you have more than you know what to do with, and prices are supported like they are now, and you feel like the next 3 years are going to be supported. So you want to invest into your operation. So just something that's interesting to think about, that this isn't chump change, but it's an investment. So anything
And
to add there?
how many cows did this start with, and how many did the 10 add to bring it up to per that 200-acre farm?
Yeah. So if I understood your question correct, you're saying how many total cows are we at now?
Well, yeah, what was the stocking rate of how many cows were on that farm before, on the 200-acre farm? And then how many did the added 10 bring it up to?
Yeah. So it was 60. So right now we're
Okay.
at 70.
Okay.
And then like just for I have to always repeat it to myself. Remember a partial budget, you can throw, I know this sounds ludicrous, you can throw total herd size out of your mind. We're only concerned with what's being added. And
Okay.
so whenever we look at it, we started with 60 and 70. We're not counting for variable cost per head of 70 right now. We're looking at, okay, what was added? The 10 bred cows were added. And then our returns, well, I'm not looking at my whole calf crop. I'm just looking at the calf crop that I inherited from increasing, from 60 to 70.
Yeah, I just think it sounds very realistic for us producers to think about, okay, I have this 200 acres that I managed with 60 cattle and everything was just fine and dandy. I was, that's a little bit understocked for a 200 acre. Well, it should be. It might be about right for some places, depending on your soil and where you're at with your water sources and all that kind of stuff. 60 to 200 acres is not an unreasonable stocking rate for a lot of people. So it just kind of is a good starting point in a producer's brain, in my brain, as a rancher, to think about, okay, I added 10 more, really not that much more hassle on myself or my part. And there's one extra fence. So there's really one gate to move them back and forth, 10 extra cows, no big deal. Really not
Yep.
much more labor there.
Yep. Absolutely. I think you're hit the nail on the head there. So that's year one, what it'll look like. I have Excel spreadsheets for all these. We can go dig into them. I can share my screen, but for the presentation purposes, I actually went straight into year 4. So now you saw how the partial budgeting was done. Now you're going to see like how it looked as it compounded itself over time. So what's uniquely interesting about doing a partial budget for a scaling up, quote unquote, an operation is I'm looking into the future, the partial budget analysis, how this looks. And a lot of times partial budgets are only used for annual decisions. And I ran this across a few old colleagues and researchers and professors of mine, and they really agreed with this approach because we're trying to see a holistic idea on once we change this, how's it going to compound itself over time. So this is where it does get a little dangerous. I'll be the first to admit with assumptions is by you get into year 4, market prices are going to change. They're very volatile, and life happens. So not everything in life is predictable, or else we would all be doing very well and know how to prepare for every single pothole that we hit. So with that, let's get into year 4. We look at our cost here. We have, I separated it.
Just put it in my brain.
Yeah.
How many cattle are we talking about running on that 200 acres now on this year 4?
Okay, so now we would be up to 100 cows, but we're only looking at the impact and change on adding 40.
Right.
because it
Sure,
started at 60. Yeah,
sure. So, but we're up to 100 on 200 acres. And
correct.
I see this 85% at the top right there. What is that referring to?
The 85% is the calving rate still.
85% having rate.
Mhm.
Okay.
85%.
I think that's
Um,
about average for our state and just some, really, it's might be a lower average. You know, we all hope for
mhm.
better, but 85% calving rate. Okay, so I'm seeing 4 steers year one, 4 heifers year one, six,
So I kind of
only
grouped
on the
them
check,
in together.
please.
Yeah,
Okay, sure.
yeah. So this is kind of it looks intimidating, I promise that it's not. Um, you remember the first year we bought bred cows on the previous slide? Well, this is the depreciation that they're experiencing now. And as you know, the longer you own something, it doesn't depreciate as fast. So now those bred cows, their appreciation is actually at a lower value annually. Um, and year two, remember we add in the goal, we added 15 bred cows. In year three, we added another 15. And that's why you're seeing their depreciation values are slightly higher because they had just been added. So they're not depreciating at the same rate. They're different. So I had to keep each year of bred cows separate from each other. So I knew their depreciation value. I still took into account the variable cost per head for every single, see, there's 40 for every single bred cow that was added onto the operation, not whole, but 40 was added. We went from 60 to 100. Uh, the labor to rotate. And then I had the same thing for steers and heifers. I had to look at each year's calf crop and say, okay, the year one calf crop that was happening, that is their vaccines, year two and year three. Um, and then for fencing, I still kept counting depreciation for every single year. For year one, when we divided it into two, we had the depreciation for it, the high tensile fencing, electric for year two ownership, and then year three we had the polyelectric fence ownership, and it's only 8 cents. Um, so now it's just ownership costs. There's no more installation. Um, So you had a total cost at the bottom right hand corner, still in the blue, of $144.91 per acre. And with all your calf crop from your year one, year two, and your year three, totaled up to be $228 per acre. So this is the first year that you've had a net effect of positive. So now you're in the profit margin. Yeah, you have depreciation still, but you've increased your stocking rate. You went from 60 to 100. You now have a larger calf crop, and you seem to be doing well here. And that's not to say that you might be in some debt still from year one, year two, and year three, because you lost money then. So, any questions on this before I move to the broader picture?
Just one question on the labor. I'm noticing that labor really doesn't change and it's not changing per year
Yeah,
on
yeah.
rotating. Using the
That
on,
that one's
but that
that
would
one's
require a system to where you have the fences already set up and you simply have to open the gate. It would not require the systems like a strip grazing or a daily, putting in for 2 hours and taking out for 2 hours. That would be more of a low input labor from what I'm seeing.
Yes, exactly. And the reason I valued it at that, just to be quite frank with y'all, is and Dr. Kirk Guidry even does it with LSU, but for a lot of people, this is, either pastures in y'all's backyards or you're right there. This is something that y'all love to do. A lot of cow producers, cow calf operation ask for budgets without labor. They don't even want labor included. And so what I did, I was very conservative with the labor. Um, and I assumed 30 minutes to rotate. And look, it could be way more than that. We all know bad things happen and things get through fences and it takes a while. Um, but I could say that maybe everything evens out in the end. I don't know. I don't know what everybody's typical day will end up like, but I think, by me saying it takes 30 minutes to rotate, um, it depends on how many cows you had. You went from 60 to 100, so maybe it is more now. But I will say that it might be even at the end because I'm also accounting for depreciation and repairing fences that might not need to be repaired. So like I'm accounting for fence repair for high tensile on year one, the high tensile fencing year two, and the poly year three. I'm accounting for repair and maintenance every single year. I'm sorry, yeah, across the year on a per foot basis. So I might be conservative on the labor, and it depends if you really pay yourself that way or not, if you count yourself. But even if not, and you're saying I'm too conservative with it, I am saying that you're repairing every single one of those fences every year, which isn't necessarily the case. So nah, I don't know, tomato, tomato.
Yes. Can you put your cursor on where that labor is incorporated with the fence repairs? That's that ownership cost, is that correct?
Yes, ownership right here.
And James, I'll tell you about one of the longest cattle moves I've ever seen in a permanent system, a situation like this, where the fencing is set up. The shortest ones I've seen have been 2 to 5 minutes, where you simply go open the gate, wait for all the cattle, 10, 15, 20 cattle to come out, and you're done. Versus one of the longest ones, I think it depends on your herd size. We went to BDA farm where I think it was about 500 cattle in Alabama. I could be totally wrong. And that was the one that took about 30 minutes because some of the cattle were lagging behind. And that's one of the longest moves. The only other longer moves I've ever seen is when you get those weanlings up, oh, the calves, when they get to being about 4 to 5 months old and they get a little spry, and sometimes they
Yeah,
can get behind a gate. But this system, if you go back to that map of our system real quick,
yeah,
this system is super simple. And let's assume that it's that simple. Let's assume there's a lane there on year one's fence line where you're just simply moving them down the lane and you just move them to the next pasture. The cattle can learn a system like that. 100 cattle can learn a system like that in an extremely short amount of time.
yeah,
Move 10 days and they really kind of should have it as a routine. Or after they move through the whole system about 3 times, they should have it down to a very quick system and be waiting for you at the gate.
right.
So you're right that I think from my experience in doing this myself and from what I've seen at other people's farms and from what I've heard from other people, that labor can be very, very minimal if you allow your fences to stay in place and let your cows learn a system.
Correct. Yeah, and I totally agree. And that's not y'all are the technical expertise, which is so fun to have these conversations on how we can value. This would be a great example on, if a partial budget was created and you did feel like it was going to take longer, then change labor, do a low, medium, high. This is
Oh, here we go again. The low
you know,
medium.
yeah, like all heck is breaking loose on this one, and then
Yeah,
this one's I think it'll be this, and then the other one will be like, maybe I invested in a bat latch system and I don't have to go out there at all. I can do
yeah.
something from my phone.
Well, if you buy the wrong cattle at the sale barn, or your order buyer buys you a fence jumper, then you're going to definitely have an increase in labor. And that's again with that
For,
full budget on cattle disposition. We need to run that one someday.
yeah, for sure. And like I said, I think at the end of the day, hopefully it somewhat evens out because if you're telling me that you put up brand new high tensile fence, okay, and it's only 3 years old, realistically, how much? I mean, it all depends, but how much repair needs to be done to it? Because in this high tensile ownership year one, I'm counting for $4.13 an acre per foot. So it's like, is that really even happening? And in most scenarios, it's not. But I'm valuing the depreciation and the useful life in the years. But you as a producer, you're not going to feel it in your pocketbook until you go out there and do it. Are you really paying yourself and then the materials to buy it? And I would almost be hesitant. I don't know. I would venture to say that between the two high tensile fences that you put up and the poly, you're not going to be doing that much repair and maintenance. Probably.
If
I
you buy
mean,
the right charger up front, the
yeah, if you
charger.
don't cheap out and get something that'll
Yeah, that we
respect.
we've made that mistake just for reference on this video right here. That's a big mistake that we see a lot of producers in the first, they're looking at the miles on their charger and they look and buy the cheapest poly wire or the really thin high tensile wire, or if that even exists, just taking some shortcuts on the quality of the fence materials. And really that's where our advisors tend to really encourage people to spend upfront on those things. Your
Yeah,
charger needs to be the most powerful charger you can get your hands on, because you're going to have cattle that may or may not respect it. There's some times in there you wouldn't want it to run on a low voltage at all.
Yeah.
And so there are some little things like that, that especially Mr. Wedgebarth, our Louisiana fencing expert at our fencing workshop, will pound in your head over and over. And
Mhm.
from our experience, I can tell you that's also a shortcut you don't want to do. Go ahead and spend the money on your fencing materials.
Yes. Very good. Very, very truthful. Well, with that being said, this is what year 4 looked like. This is your first year of profit. And so now, I'll show you all the graph of what happened out to year 10. And it got a little complicated because I did one of these spreadsheets for each one of these years to try to forecast and project where it is we're going now at this higher rate. And as you all know, Tara, like, how long would you keep a bred cow that you just added on? That depends, maybe a 5-7 year. I don't know. I knew back whenever we did the numbers together, but eventually you're going to sell the cull cow and you're going to have to buy back to keep at that stocking rate. So you're going to have replacements come in. So that factors in. Another thing that I realized actually, presenting at LACD, was someone asked, I don't have a bull price in here, which is very true, but it would depend on how many cows you're comfortable putting that bull on, because you're not going to purchase a new bull because you put 10 on. You're still going to incur the same expense that you did in the system before. But something that was
in a 60 cow operation, typically most people would run 2 bulls, at least maybe 3 or 4, depending on their trust level in their bulls. So truly getting it up to 100. Kit Farrow is a really interesting resource that I refer to on this. He swears that a good bull should be able to breed an awful lot more cattle. Especially, and one thing that some people have experienced with rotational grazing is that with tightening your cattle up into these paddocks, the bulls spend less time walking and chasing cattle. So which
they're more
also
effective.
increases your calving rate and your bull longevity as well, because it's less wear and tear on their bodies. It also could tighten them up for some more fighting, which could cause more damage on the bulls too. So there's some pros and cons there.
Right.
But that's one thing I've found, is that calving rates, from what I hear from other people, have tended to increase tremendously. So that number, I'm sure, is not even reflected here, to increased calving. Yeah, that's a really interesting point about the bull. Might be worth including.
Yeah, it might be worth going if I had to redo it, maybe now, because I mean we added 40 more. So it might be worth, whether you choose to rent or own a bull, whatever. It might be worthy to look at another one of those calls, but it depends how efficient and effective they are already, and having a good bull. So I thought that was it was a good question, but definitely for the first 2 years, I wouldn't say that your expenses wouldn't change at all, because if anything, the bulls, like, they can handle how many mamas are out there already. So anyway, that was just a little tidbit I thought was interesting. So let's move on to the results. Unless you want to go through more Excel spreadsheets, I can. We can go out to 10. So I plotted, I plotted all of those changes in profit from the partial budget analysis on a 10-year basis using the partial budget. So what we're seeing is year 1 to 3, as I showed, remember that negative number? It was showing, okay, remember, we got to pay for our interior fencing, and we're buying bred cows. That's what we're seeing year 1 through 3. But year 4, you finally, that past slide, you saw that we're finally in the profit margins here. I think it was $88 or something like that. What was it? Yeah, $83. So now that is your change in profit, and you're doing good. However, you have not paid back what you invested for the fence and the bred cows. So your payback period on this actually ended up being 5 years and 6 months. And your return on investment was 17%, which is really, really good. Again, these are all assumptions, but 17% return on investment for those of y'all who keep up just with benchmark S&P 500 and what the market's doing, you know, for a decade, you're going to be doing really good to get anywhere between 8, 9, all the way up to 11%. So your return on investment is very high here. It looks really good, and your net present value is positive. It's $150, which is great. That means that going out to a 10-year cash flow, if you use the discount rate and said how much is the future cash flows worth now, it would be $150, which is really good. That means this is a worthy investment from an economist perspective. This would be equal to a really aggressive, good growth mutual fund. This is really good stuff here. So, but I mean, just like everything in life, that's good is always on the other side of hard. I always say that. It takes a little bit of grit, and it takes being willing and capability to undergo some investment costs on the front end. So I didn't account for any equip programs or any cost share on any of this. This would also speed up by a good year and a half your ability to pay the stuff off. So you could operate at higher profit margins sooner with the program. But really, my whole thing about this is the science is true here. And what we see now with a higher stocking rate and the ability for the forage growth to keep up with the feeding demand, as now this producer has lifted the utility of the forage to where now she is operating at higher profit margins. It's not that you're growing more grass, it's that every blade of grass is utilized more. So I think what's neat about this is, you know, using the same amount of acreage, 200 acres, you're now operating at higher profit margins by just managing and utilizing your forage. And granted, it took some investment with interior fencing, and it still takes your labor. But this little dip that you see, and I can show you an Excel spreadsheet graphs, this is what I was talking about earlier. If we bought bred cows in year 1, by year 5, we're likely maybe getting rid of them. And so those were other assumptions that are factored into this that wasn't shown was, okay, year 5, we're getting rid of them. So we sold them as cull cows. Okay. And I had the price of assumptions earlier. We sold them as cull cows, and we had to buy back that same amount in bred cows. And so this little lull is that time and period that the year 1, 2, and 3, the 10, 15, and 15, that is your year to, okay, we're trying to keep the stocking rate up. And so we're replacing. And so cull cows have a lesser value. And so whenever you're buying the bred cow, it's going to be more expensive. So you're going to experience a little bit of a dip there, but still your profit margins, even when you're doing that, are so much higher than the beginning of year 1. And so, yeah, I hope that makes sense. Again, I'm not saying that this is profitable on a whole operation. This is the change in profit. All sorts of stuff can happen to supply shocks, to prices just going crazy and you not being able to achieve that. Life hits. Maybe it's hard to rotate. You just don't have the time. Things happen. But from an economic and scientific databases, and this is very realistic. This is achievable. This is conservative, but it takes time. You know, a payback period of 5 years and 6 months is not nothing. So, Tara, anything to add on that and how this graph looks?
Super interesting graph, James. Super interesting. And I'm kind of looking at that return on an investment, 17%. That really leaves a lot of wiggle room to, you know, to suppose the cattle market goes quite a bit down. Well, you're still kind of set up there. And suppose your ROI goes in that 10-year period down to 9%. Well, that's still close to what you would be making in the stock market. You know, ROI, if it goes down to 12% because you have to increase more, or if you get a whole lot better at breeding cattle, you're raising larger calves, or you're able to add 10 more in that system and really, you know, more fence, and that would be a whole nother partial budget to really increase it more. But there are ways It's so interesting to see to me that there's some wiggle room there and that there could be ways to really increase that and or average it out to where if you like had to add water systems, for example, then
Mhm.
that would change it. But if you're able to utilize the EQIP NRCS programs and get it approved for that, which is a cost sharing of your infrastructure, a cost sharing of your interior fences, and a cost sharing of building a water system, depending on if you're willing to do the work yourself or contract it out. There's just so much wiggle room here that I think it's an impressive ROI.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And I think the key part of this message, especially for year 1 and 3, is, try to get in with the equip. We have cost share on prescribed grazing and the facilitating supporting practices with that. We pay for fence, for livestock pipeline, for heavy use pads. We have a slew of practices and scenarios to help serve y'all to be able to care about your forage growth and productivity to get into this kind of system. And our goal is for you to experience less risk when adopting these new conservation practices. So we want to speed up your payback period so that you can enjoy the returns while having good management practices. That's what we're all about. And you
And
know,
you know what we didn't touch actually? What was not included here is that manure value.
oh yeah, no, yeah, not at all. I'm not that I want to be very careful and still remember the variable cost per head that I use for every single bred cow that was bought was on a very conventional variable cost basis for LSU budget because we're talking about feeding in the winter. Hey, we're not talking about meeting forage growth curves in the winter and trying to lengthen your growing season at all.
That was
So
at
I mean,
$600 per cow per year. That's
yes.
an average cost assessment that LSU comes out with every single year. Um, James, where do we find that cost analysis?
Yeah,
That
so if you went to LSU, and even if you Google search LSU cow calf cost and returns 2024 or 2025, it should pull up, but it's on LSU AgCenter's website. Um, Sometimes it takes some digging around to do on there, but it also helps if you tag wonderful man Dr. Kurt Guidry. Comes out with a bunch of really good, relevant market data and works really hard at what he does to calculate as close as he can. We really do rely, I feel like, a lot on Mississippi and some other Southeast places that we can get data. So we try to make it as relative to us as possible, relevant. But yeah, so go look at the data and you can see he breaks it down. Hay that he's feeding, vet bill expenses, um, and see if that's even close to what you think that it is for you. All these things aren't necessarily gospel. They're not 100% true. They're a typical scenario for Louisiana. And rotational grazing seems like one of these things that it's catching on now, but it's not a typical thing. That's why no research has been done. And my goal here was to start the conversation and have an economic discussion about it because there is a lack of research. And I don't like to say lack of research. There can be further potential research to be had between all of our partnerships. And that's what I would like to see moving on here and moving forward.
And the science is so great. These numbers, being so conservative, truly can show us a great picture of what this potentially can do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I actually forgot. There's one more
Oh,
little
good.
bitty slide. So this is with high tensile. The year 1 and 2, and then 3 we went poly. I think I'd thrown out there, I was like, what would happen if you had confidence and you're very familiar with polyelectric and you felt like that's what you wanted to do? So I actually ran the same analysis, but with only poly fencing. It was kind of my low, medium, high way of doing it. It was like, okay, what's the lowest cost that I can get interior fencing? No program, no equip cost share, anything. And this is with poly, like all poly, and your return on investment went up to 24%. And your payback period was 4 years. So I did that just so that you could see that choose whatever you're comfortable with. Don't skimp out. but polyelectric being so much cheaper, the payback period was way faster and your return on investment was had. So if you don't have all the capital in the world, but you really believe in the system and want to do it, it's viable, and there's low cost ways to get into this management system. So.
Yeah, and James, there's one more fencing option that I'm sure you've heard some rumors about and talk
Oh
about
yeah.
that we didn't even include in the study, and but I think it's going to be a reality coming forward, is virtual fencing.
Mhm.
You simply have a collar, and it's kind of a rental situation. I think in the future you'll be able to buy those collars or rent to buy, and with every technology such as cell phones and stuff, I'm sure that price will over time go down as far as initial investment costs. But um from the rumors, it sounds like virtual fencing is a solid option that could be, I have no idea, to be honest, where it would fall on the economic scale of cost, because there are only about 4 companies that I know of right now doing it. We're
Yeah.
gonna showcase one of those this year. We're gonna have a field day at a farm in Louisiana that's actually utilizing virtual fences to manage about 500 cattle. And they've been able to take down their polywire and their any other fences and utilize this technology instead. So super interesting to think about and look forward to in the future. Thank you so much for your time spent doing this. It was a really valuable time spent from Louisiana NRCS's office. And we can't thank you more and your supervisors and your team more for allowing you the time to do this.
Thanks, Tara. And we really appreciate Louisiana Grazing Lands educating producers and working alongside them, and trying to get the message out of good forage management practices and prescribed grazing. So it was my joy and honor and privilege to be able to do this. This is what I love to do. Any way that I could add economic value, particularly to conversations that hasn't been started yet. That's kind of what I love to do. But yeah, thank you so much.
What Louisiana GLCI likes to do is, for one, of course, connect you to know where to start with your NRCS office. We are not the NRCS office by any means, nor qualified to do all of that, but we can certainly connect you to the right place. But what we really love to do is bring people on farms that are actually implementing this or that are at that year 5 or 6 or 10 and who have been doing it for a while, where you can see and talk to them about what their costs might actually be and where they've cut costs, or what they're seeing as improvements, and what we're seeing over and over and over with every single pasture walk that we host or field visit that we do at these farms. Whether or not there's research, there's an awful lot of anecdotal evidence of better calving rates, better cow health, better gain, um, some different genetics that have worked better for them to gain more pounds per acre of beef to sell. So many benefits, and that's where we love to do and love to shine. So I encourage you, if you're listening to this webinar and you're in the Deep South, check us out, watch our events page, and come join us on one of these farms where you can see these practices in action and really pick into the brains of these producers who have been doing it for a while. And if you've made it all the way through this video and you see some things that you'd like to question or you think are incorrect, please feel free to comment and we'd love to discuss.
That brings us to the end of our 2-part series on rotational grazing economics. A big thank you to James McCann for sharing his valuable knowledge and insights throughout both sessions. We truly appreciate your time and expertise. If you found this series helpful, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, sign up for our newsletter, and follow us on social media for more educational content on grazing management and conservation. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.